17-year-old Audie Murphy stood ankle-deep in frozen mud, steam rising from the wreckage around him as the bitter January wind carried the smell of fuel, cordite, and blood. His platoon was broken, scattered bodies, abandoned rifles, frightened survivors crawling through the tree line behind him. Through the gray curtain of snow and smoke, German panzers advanced in a slow, confident line, black iron beasts clattering forward like fate itself. Moments earlier, intercepted SS radio chatter crackled through the ice-bitten silence. Ein Junge. Machen Sie Schluss. Just a boy. Finish him. The commander believed what his eyes told him. A lone teenage soldier standing beside a burning U.S. tank destroyer, outnumbered, outgunned, already written off by probability. But the truth was not what the Germans imagined. Murphy wasn't running. He was climbing onto the crippled vehicle, its deck already beginning to hiss from leaking fuel, flames licking its hull like hungry fingers. From up there, he could see everything, including the moment when the SS realized too late that the boy was staying to fight. His boots slipped on the scorched steel as he wrenched the Browning .50 into position. He wasn't supposed to still be alive. He wasn't supposed to stand his ground. He wasn't supposed to hold an entire flank alone. History records that he stopped a panzer assault by himself for nearly an hour. Veterans who watched it said it looked inhuman, as if the war had poured every dead man in his unit into one last survivor and told him, "Don't break." The SS saw a child. What rose to meet them was something else entirely. Before Audie Murphy ever faced tanks, he faced hunger, the slow, grinding kind that turns childhood into boot camp. He was born into a collapsing world long before Europe caught fire. Texas farmland during the Great Depression didn't grow futures. It barely grew food. His father came and went like wind through a screen door, sometimes present, mostly absent, leaving a mother already drowning in children and work that never ended. There was no cavalry coming. No teacher spotted him as promising. No friendly neighbor lifted the burden. Audie learned the first rule of war before he ever saw a rifle. Nobody is coming to save you. He was small for his age, thin, restless, sharp-eyed. Not the kind of boy anyone would predict would one day face down steel armor columns. He didn't have the luxury of dreaming about greatness. He was too busy surviving the next meal. He hunted rabbits barefoot with a borrowed .22 rifle, not because he liked the woods, but because if he failed, there was no dinner. Hardship didn't shape his character. It replaced it with resistance. Every day built the same reflex: don't break. When he was old enough to understand what leaving meant, his father vanished for good. His mother fell ill soon after. The family splintered, siblings scattered to relatives, to foster homes, to whatever system would hold them. Poverty was no longer a condition. It was the architect of his life. He dropped out in the 5th grade to work. He didn't become disciplined by choice. The world had already drafted him. Then came the final blow, the one that turned desperation into direction. His mother died when he was just 16. Her death didn't just take away the last stable thing he had. It snapped the cord tethering him to boyhood. He walked out of that funeral with nothing left but a body still too young to enlist and a grief too old to bury. War was calling men overseas, and Murphy saw only one path that made sense. If the world was going to keep taking from him, he was going to choose where to stand when it tried again. He tried the Marines first, rejected. Too small. Tried the Navy, rejected. Too underweight. Even the paratroopers turned him down. Not heroic enough. Not big enough. Not soldier material. That line would become ironic, almost biblical, later. The Army finally took him, grudgingly, but only into the infantry, a place where officers joked that riflemen die fast and quietly. Murphy wasn't being groomed for valor. He was being fed into a machine. But the machine didn't know what it had just swallowed. Training camp exposed something unusual. Not bravado, not toughness, but focus. While other recruits were still adjusting to discipline, Murphy already lived inside it. Hunger had taught him silence. Loss had taught him detachment. Hunting had taught him patience. Responsibility for younger siblings had taught him to act when everyone else froze. Pain didn't frighten him. He treated it like weather. Drill sergeants called him too quiet, maybe even soft. But those same men would later read the after-action reports describing what that quiet turned into under fire. Greatness doesn't always walk into a story with fanfare. Sometimes it slips through the side door unnoticed. He had no destiny stamped on him, no prophecy, no shining endorsement. Just that raw, coiled instinct that surfaces in people who were never allowed to be children in the first place. The army tried to toughen him. Life already had, and buried beneath the fatigue, the rifle drills, the shouted commands, something else was starting to flicker. Not pride, not ambition, readiness. Because the moment he stepped off that troop ship in the Mediterranean, he would discover something that the world, especially his enemies, never saw coming. He was built for combat long before he wore a uniform. But that raises the deeper question, the one that makes his story more than medals and myth. Was he brave, or was he already numb? Did war forge him, or simply reveal the weapon poverty had created? And when Europe finally met Audie Murphy, did they meet a soldier or a survivor too exhausted to die? The answers would come soon, in the hills of Italy and the fields of France, where his commanders stopped calling him that small farm kid and started calling him something else entirely, indispensable. Because the world loves heroic backstories, but Murphy didn't have one. He had a wound, or simply gave a battlefield. And when the SS eventually mocked him as just a kid, they had no idea that life had already made him something deadlier than a veteran, a fighter with nothing left to lose. When Audie Murphy first stepped onto European soil, he didn't look like the kind of man history remembers. He looked like the replacement, the quiet kid everyone assumed wouldn't last a month. Officers slotted him into the ranks the way firewood is stacked before winter, meant to be used, then gone. Soldiers whispered estimates behind his back. 2 weeks, one engagement, maybe he'll freeze before he gets hit. No one said it with cruelty. They said it with resignation. World War II was chewing through young men like a forge that never cooled. But the battlefield has its own way of ranking men, not by size, not by swagger, but by who moves when everything locks up in fear. The first time Murphy saw combat was a small skirmish, the kind that never shows up in history books. A German patrol ambushed his unit at dawn. Most recruits do one of 3 things their first time under fire. They freeze, they panic, or they obey, training mechanically while shaking through it. Murphy did none of the 3. He closed distance. He crawled, rolled, darted to cover, and returned fire with frightening precision for someone who had never fought a modern enemy. Afterward, one of the older sergeants watched him quietly and muttered, "Kid doesn't scare right." He didn't mean it as a compliment. He meant it as a warning. Fear protects you. Murphy moved like a man who had already rehearsed death so many times that seeing it on a battlefield didn't feel new. As the campaign moved north through Italy and into France, his reputation grew. Not from boasting, but from survival. Men started sticking close to him, not because the army said so, but because probability said so. Standing near Murphy simply meant you were more likely to go home. He became a dead-eye marksman without ever attending sniper school. He had no doctrine, just deadly judgment. He fired only when sure. He advanced only when needed. He exposed himself only when the risk meant saving someone else. This wasn't movie bravery. It was surgical calculation from someone who had been forced to think like prey his entire youth, until prey learned how predators moved. He earned his first decorations not from heroics, but from consistency under pressure. Small unit engagements, quiet saves, split-second calls. The Army hadn't discovered him yet, but the enemy was beginning to feel him. The turning point came during a firefight in southern France. His unit was pinned down behind a stone wall by machine gun fire. Men were bleeding out. Any attempt to flank failed. The squad could either stay and die, or someone could do something unthinkable. Murphy didn't rush in fury like a Hollywood charge. He simply assessed the math, realized waiting meant certain death, and crawled through open ground toward the German position with the same cold focus he once used stalking rabbits. He killed the machine gun crew, took their position, and used it against their reinforcements alone. When the smoke cleared, the stunned survivors from his unit walked past the pile of shell casings at his feet and saw a face with no triumph, no adrenaline grin, no fist pump, just a controlled stillness. He didn't look proud. He looked confirmed, as if some part of him already knew he would outlast whoever tried him. That moment spread through ranks faster than his name did. Soldiers began saying, "Stick with the Texan." Commanders began saying, "Send Murphy." The battlefield, not the bureaucracy, was promoting him. But rise comes with a shadow. Survivors start counting ghosts. Murphy lost friends by the handful. Every saved life cost another. Tactically, he was winning. Humanly, he was tallying. When replacements looked at him with the awe normally reserved for officers, he didn't feel honored. He felt isolated. They wanted him to be a symbol. He was still a scar, stitched into a body that refused to fall. By the time he reached the Vosges Mountains, that dark, forested corridor leading to the brutal winter line, the myth had begun. Whispers in foxholes said he had a sixth sense for ambushes, that he could smell snipers, that he shot faster than he thought. Stories always grow larger than the man, especially when death keeps checking his name and backing away. But every legend has a fuse burning underneath it. Survivors don't grow into fame. They grow toward their breaking point. And the winter of 1945 would be that breaking point. No compass, no doctrine, no medal could prepare him for what was waiting beyond the tree line. A front collapsing under ice and armor, and a German command still convinced that the American line was soft, exhausted, and ready to fold. They didn't know that waiting in that snow was the one soldier who never learned how to quit, because life had never given him anywhere to quit to. The coming weeks would not just test him. They would turn him into something else entirely. When the Colmar pocket froze into a killing ground and German armor began its push, Murphy would not simply face the enemy. He would hold ground no statistic said was survivable. But before that stand came the question his commanders didn't know they were already asking. What happens when the one-man war keeps, sparing finally stops running from its weight, and turns to face it head-on? Because courage is easy to admire at a distance, but up close in the snow and silence, it looks like obsession. An obsession, under enemy fire, can change wars. By January 1945, Europe was a graveyard of momentum. Armies exhausted, roads choked with frozen wreckage, and hope stretching thinner than the rations. The Allies had pushed deep into France, but winter was no ally. The snow didn't just fall, it sealed. It silenced trees. It erased tracks. It trapped the living beside the dead in the same quiet white shroud. The region known as the Colmar Pocket was a butcher's geometry, a protruding wedge of German territory the Allies needed gone, but couldn't afford to bleed for. The land was a maze of orchards, ditches, icy canals, and hidden fields of fire. The enemy held the high ground. The Americans held frostbitten morale and not much else. Murphy's division was thrown in under strength, patched together by attrition, stripped by cold, and already past endurance. Men rotated forward with hollow eyes, some too numb to fear, others too tired to pray. The orders were simple and suicidal. Hold. No matter what. That sounds bold in a briefing room. In the field, it means this: if armor comes, you dive buying time for someone behind you. Murphy's platoon dug in along the tree line near the village of Holzwehr. Trucks stalled on ice. Radios crackled with half-messages swallowed by static. They could hear panzers long before they saw them. A distant grinding thunder under the snow crust, like iron awakening. If the men were honest, few expected to walk away. Their fuel was low, ammunition even lower. Reinforcements were theoretical. Winter punishes hesitation, but this battlefield punished existence itself. The cold numbed the trigger finger before courage had a chance to reach it. Men huddled behind wrecked farm walls and down branches, watching their own breath fog into ghosts. Murphy was now a lieutenant. Still small, still quiet, but the one figure everyone looked toward when reality began to tilt. He was the same age as some boys back home, still sitting in schoolrooms. Yet he carried casualties and command like a man 3 wars old. Leadership had become less about issuing orders and more about refusing to crumble where others watched. The first armor probe hit like a drumbeat. Fast scouts testing lines, probing for collapse. Then came the infantry feelers, slipping through tree lanes like wolves through snowfall. Snipers cracked rifle shots through the branches. Every sound was threat. Every shape was a warning. Then came the realization, the one that freezes a battlefield deeper than weather. German armor was massing. Not a probing raid, a breakthrough push. The Allied command had miscalculated the size and speed of the counteroffensive. The men holding Holzwehr were not part of the line. They were the line. If they broke, the German column could spill through, reassemble, and carve a wound back into France that would sever supply routes and sabotage everything secured since Normandy. Murphy's radio sputtered only fragments. Artillery support delayed, reinforcements uncertain, withdrawal denied. So the platoon waited, half praying, half gritting teeth, for the storm of steel that logic said they could not stop. The ground shook first, then the tree line split open, and the panzers came. They advanced in formation like an armored tide, black silhouettes against white snow, engines rumbling like thunder trapped in iron chests. Infantry followed in disciplined lines, a dark smear of movement behind the tank armor. Confident, methodical, inevitable. The Americans were not seeing a battle. They were seeing a funeral march. Murphy scanned the horizon, his breath steady, his mind narrowing not to fear, but to math. Angles, distance, cover, ammunition, time. The rest of the platoon looked at him, some openly, some from the corners of their eyes, waiting for the signal to panic or stand. But he did not waver. He didn't look heroic. He looked resolved. What does a man think at that moment, when survival takes on the shape of impossibility? Does he see his life flashing through his mind, or does he see only the next target? Does courage live in the heart, or in the refusal to accept the ending others have written for you? The first Allied positions shattered under artillery strikes. Snow exploded into dirt and splintered wood. Searing metal ripped through the line. American soldiers scrambled, bleeding, slipping, dragging the wounded on numb legs. Radios screamed for support that wasn't coming fast enough, and still the tanks kept coming. Then a field telephone operator stumbled toward Murphy with a one-sentence, no frontline commander wants to hear, "We can't hold this position." Every calculation said the same. Stay, and they are overrun. Retreat, and the entire sector collapses. There was no safe answer. Only bad options and worse consequences. This is where most stories of war are about units, or companies, or heroic last stand-by groups. This time, history pivoted onto one man. Because when the retreat order formed on every soldier's lips, Murphy refused to give it. He told the wounded to fall back, told the survivors to reposition deeper in the tree line. But he did not move with them. Something, instinct defiance, the ghost of every fallen brother, rooted him in place. He would hold this ground alone if he had to. And soon he would. The frozen inferno was about to reveal its final layer of cruelty. The American armor support behind them had already been reduced to burning hulks, except for one crippled M10 tank destroyer, leaking fuel, half-ruined, flames licking its hull like warning tongues. A death trap, a coffin waiting to ignite. But to Murphy, it looked like high ground. And while the rest of the line fell back under the crushing weight of German steel, the smallest soldier in the sector walked toward the burning wreck, not away from it. Because some stories don't bend toward logic. They bend toward inevitability. The crippled tank destroyer hissed like a dying animal, leaking fuel, its hull scorched black, its interior already glowing with embers. Any sane man would have used it as cover for a final fallback. Murphy used it as a platform. He scrambled onto the burning chassis, boots slipping on slick steel, the flames spitting sparks against his uniform. From that height, he could see the entire German advance, armor cresting the rise, infantry spreading through the fields, machine gun teams setting up firing nests to finish the retreating Americans. This wasn't a firefight anymore. It was a rolling execution. And one man had just decided to interrupt it. He seized the Browning .50 caliber mounted on the wreck, swung it into position, and opened fire. Not warning shots, not harassment fire, killing fire, precise, punishing bursts tearing through enemy infantry before they reached cover. The SS column hesitated. Tanks do not think, but the men behind them do. What they saw in their scopes shouldn't have made sense. A lone figure on top of a burning hulk, standing his ground instead of fleeing. No fear, no retreat, just raw refusal. German infantry fanned out to flank him. Murphy cut them down. A squad tried advancing through a low ditch. He traced the ditch line and erased them with measured bursts. He pivoted, found a runner hauling a radio pack, and felled him before he hit the dirt. His platoon, now regrouping in the tree line behind him, stared in disbelief. They had fallen back, expecting to lose Murphy to the blast. Instead, they were watching a teenager stop an armored advance by sheer will. The M10 beneath him groaned as flames chewed deeper, ammunition cooking off inside. Chunks of shrapnel spat outward as the interior smoldered toward detonation. But Murphy stayed, anchored not by bravery, but by a terrifying clarity. If he left that gun, they all died. Enemy machine gunners zeroed in. Rifle bullets slapped against the steel hull. Splinters ricocheted past his face. A panzer commander barked orders. Concentrate fire, suppress the gunner, break the line. It should have worked. It didn't. Murphy shifted into a ruthless rhythm. Short bursts, target shift, short bursts, reposition. The way hunters track running prey. The boy who once stalked jackrabbits in Texas was now dismantling an assault element of the Waffen-SS. And yet, he wasn't just firing. He was directing artillery. Pinned to a burning coffin, he grabbed his field phone with his free hand, calling in coordinates between bursts. Calm, exact, as if he were watching a map, not staring down death. Forward observers later said his voice never shook, not once. He wasn't screaming into the handset. He was correcting fire like a surgeon giving instructions. Drop 50, left 20, fire for effect. The German infantry never understood what killed them first. The .50 cal, or the sky tearing open behind them. A tank slewed sideways, burning. Another reverse position. Panic rippled through their infantry screen. Reports later revealed the SS believed they had run into a dug-in company, not a single furious lieutenant holding ground alone. But even legends fracture under arithmetic. The Browning barrel glowed white-hot. The wreck under him bucked and hissed. Flames licked his legs. And still, he held. A mortar shell exploded close enough to blast him back against the turret plating, ripping his coat and shoving splinters into his flesh. He got back up. He kept firing. Murphy had moved beyond courage. This was something colder, something that looks from the outside like a man possessed, but is actually a man emptied out. The SS finally attempted a direct armored push, one Panzer breaking forward to crush the gunner's perch and end the defiance. The tank lurched toward him, and Murphy turned the .50 onto the exposed infantry escort instead, starving the armor of eyes and rifles. The tank advanced alone, blind. It hesitated, then pivoted, then backed away, because without infantry to shield it, the next artillery strike would carve it open. That's when the German line cracked, not from casualties, but from disbelief. The Panzer Brigade had not been stalled by fortifications, not by numbers, not by armor parity, by one man, a boy they were told, a problem they discovered, a wall they met. Minutes blurred, fire roared, smoke swallowed his silhouette. Only when his ammo finally ran, dry did Murphy climb down, stunned, shaking from exhaustion and blood loss, but not defeated, and rejoin his platoon. And here is the detail that historians still pause over. The moment he touched solid ground again, wounded, concussed, near collapse, he ordered counterattack. He didn't fall back. He didn't rest. He went forward. Men who moments earlier thought him dead now followed him back across the killing field. Not out of duty, not out of rank, but out of something wordless. The realization that this lone figure standing in flames had bought them a second life. When the battlefield finally fell silent, the charred husk of the tank destroyer looked like an altar, and the snow around it was littered with German dead. Records say he held the line for nearly an hour. Witnesses say the number feels too small. But the deeper truth is more haunting. A brigade was stopped by the one soldier least expected to survive the morning. This is where most stories end. The hero moment, the triumphant image, freeze-framed in history like certainty. But war doesn't end when the applause begins. For the man who stands in the fire does not leave him. When news of the stand at Holzwehr reached command, it did not travel like a story. It traveled like a shockwave. Reports sounded wrong, improbable. A lieutenant, alone, halting an armored advance? Headquarters assumed exaggeration. Then the casualty maps came in. Then the artillery logs. Then the witness testimonies from men who could barely speak through adrenaline hangover. The Medal of Honor paperwork began almost immediately. But here's the part people rarely hear. Murphy didn't feel like a hero. He didn't walk off that battlefield proud or triumphant. He walked off hollow. He had held the line, but he had also outlived his friend again. The praise hit him like cold rain. Heavy, unwanted. He didn't see valor. He saw faces that would never leave those frozen orchards. Heroes are celebrated by nations, but they are carried by ghosts. When the medal was finally placed in his hands, he looked uncomfortable, like someone being forced to stand in the spotlight for surviving what others didn't. The applause echoed. Cameras flashed. Speeches wrapped his name in glory. But something inside him had already gone quiet, too quiet. The country saw a legend formed in fire. Murphy felt a wound that hadn't stopped bleeding. Back home, he was greeted as a symbol, the boy soldier, the miracle lieutenant, the unbreakable fighter. But the truth was far less cinematic. He was barely sleeping. He flinched at slamming doors. He scanned every room he walked into. He sat with his back to walls. He carried a pistol not for vanity, but because his nervous system never returned to peacetime speed. Today we call it PTSD. Back then they called it nerves, or worse, weakness. The Army had forged a myth, but the myth came with a cost no metal offsets. Murphy could not go back to being a person. He became public property. Wherever he went, people wanted stories, wanted details, wanted recreation of the moment. He should have died, but didn't. But the battlefield doesn't leave when you leave the battlefield. Some nights he would wake drenched in sweat, gripping the mattress like it was cover from incoming fire. Other nights, he would sit awake until dawn because silence sounded too much like waiting for an ambush. His brain never left the treeline. That is the hidden truth of legends. They don't go home. They just relocate the war. Hollywood eventually came calling, and everyone assumed that meant healing, fame, stability, a new life. But the camera cannot film what won't stay still inside a man. Audie Murphy became famous, yes, but in ways that deepened the fracture. Crowds saw the war hero. Studios saw marketable courage. But the people closest to him saw a man still bracing for an artillery strike that wasn't coming. He slept with a pistol under his pillow for decades. Some part of him never stepped off that burning tank destroyer. Because when the world labels you invincible, they stop allowing you to be human. The price of surviving is carrying the memory of those who didn't. The price of valor is isolation. The price of becoming a symbol is losing the right to be ordinary. America had gained a hero. Audie Murphy had lost the last piece of boyhood he had left. And this is the final question his story forces us to confront. Not about medals or tanks or battlefield courage, but something colder. Was he honored or used? Did the country celebrate him or simply display him? And when war was done with him, what was left? Murphy lived out the rest of his years balancing two truths. The world believed he was unbreakable, and the war knew it had already broken him. But maybe this is why his story still matters. Not because he stood alone against tanks, but because he showed what it really costs to stand when everyone else falls. Some legends are born from destiny. Others are born from survival. And the men who survive sometimes carry the battlefield longer than the war itself. History remembers the moment he fired, but it rarely remembers the years he spent living with the echo. The battlefield made him immortal, but it never set him free. If you want more stories like this, the real ones, the ones with cost and consequence, stay with us. Because the next name we uncover won't be in textbooks either, but it should be.